Alrighty, so welcome everybody. We are here talking about workplace wellness and health promotion. Thank you for being here. As I mentioned, as I was hitting the record button, we're all a little bit, I think, sleepy this week. We exciting information coming through the pipe with the Jays and staying up too late probably. But regardless, we're here, and I'm excited you're here too. My name is Megan Jansen, and I'm the owner of Employee Wellness Solutions Network. We are a Canadian-based workplace wellness and health promotion company, and we've been in operation since 2003. I know I don't look that old, but I am. So we've been in operation for 22 years, and we work with organizations from all over. Today's session is the fourth of four modules that we've been presenting over this year. We like to run these on a quarterly basis, just give folks who have an interest in a workplace wellness and health promotion at your workplace some information and hopefully some strategic practices that might be helpful for your efforts, because we all know how much effort it does take to have a wellness program go well. And so we're here to talk about a few takeaways with that. Now, before I get started, you have indicated that it's okay that we're recording this. We do that because following today's session, we're going to go through what is going to be the game plan here, what you'll have access to following today's session as well. So we're going to get into it. The chat box is enabled as well. If we lose connection, just pop back on the link that you took you to today's session and we'll get started. I'm in London today. I don't know where everybody else is, but it's not a very sunny day. So sitting right in front of a window to hopefully make me feel a little bit more awake today. All right, so we have partnered with HRPA. And what that means is if you are in HR and you need some continuing education or what we call the CPD hours, then you found the right place. We are awarding all attendees one CPD hour. If you attended all four, including today, you would have received four. So you will be receiving an individualized code that HRPA has that it links into this session. And so you will be emailed that information. But the caveat is this: you have to be online for at least 45 minutes. Good news is I'm going to take us that long, so you won't be missing anything, but definitely be here for at least 45. So we should be done there in and about that time anyway. So those of you on the call that are current members of Employee Wellness Solutions Network, this is an important announcement. You may have been seen that you may have noticed that our site and our hub and our dashboard has been finicky this week. We have had some server and email disruptions. So that said, we are going to be loading the dashboard hub with this leadership access information. However, for the purposes of this session, we may be sending everything via email. Now, we will load the leadership hub regardless. And then once we're able to get back on and in, then you'll be able to retrieve all of the information there, and it's there forever, so you can use it. That said, though, it is password protected, so no, your employees can't get into it. It's only you as leaders, and so we will be sending you a password. With the disruption of our system, we are experiencing some challenges right now, which we're in damage control with a few different things. Regardless, we will be ensuring that you get all of the information that is here on the screen where we are recording this session, all of the amazing resources that we'll talk about today, as well as the content and also the webinar slides. So you'll be able to see, again, some takeaway information that you can share with your wellness teams or co-leaders, or, if you're interested in connecting via email, we can certainly set up a session to discuss your program a little bit further. Regardless, we will be sending you an HRPA code. We use a platform called Constant Contact. And so sometimes it likes spam and junk folders. So just be wary of that. Please check that because of our system being a little bit down. We are having a few challenges and some workarounds. So stay tuned for that. those of you who are not current members of EWS Network, whatever I just said, forget about it. And it's not on your dashboard or anything, obviously. We will be sending all of the information via email. Same rules apply. Please, please, please check your junk and spam folder. We keep an eye on any bounces, but if anything does come, doesn't get through, we will flag that and send to you a different way. So again, just keep an eye on that. All right, so here's a look at the four modules that we've been talking about all year. This is the fall quarter, or the fourth quarter, I suppose, of the year. And so the first quarter, we talked about setting the stage, and that was really all about, defining what workplace wellness truly is. I'm going to be referring to that a little bit today as we sort of tie up the bookend of what we're talking about. The second quarter, we talked about creating a healthy culture. This was an awesome one. I talked about garnering leadership support. How do we build the right wellness team? How many people we should have? What types of people do we want on the team? Do we go with volunteers? Do we go with signups? When during the year do we want to have that, that team culture discussed? And there's certain times during the year, the fall being a great time to kickstart a wellness program, and specifically with a wellness team. October, we're at the end of it now, is Healthy Workplace Month across our country. And so it's been a very busy month for us, I'm sure for you as well. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. The third quarter, we talked about implementing the right stuff. So what do we do? What initiatives are the most important? How do we do that? How do we include various teams, floors, departments, satellite offices? We talked about best practices when it came to communication, visibility, and integrating everything. How do we connect the dots? And so we don't just have different pieces to our program, all over the place. We have EAP over here. We have, benefits here. We have training here. We have social committee here. How do we tie it all together? And we shared some strategic plans with you to sort of help align what some of the things that you might be experiencing within your programs. The fourth element today is we're talking about evaluation. So if you do have a program, then this hopefully I love to share some quick practical takeaways, and hopefully you will be able to implement some of the thoughts on evaluation as we move forward. So just to sort of put all of the last three modules into a graphic before we get into evaluation, I like this graphic because it showcases from a value perspective, which we're going to get into a little bit today, is the value of what we do is in line with certain types of programs according to how engaged and how involved and how participatory employees are. So if there's no accountability, if there's no, participation, if there's not an incentive to do something, then we don't tend to see as much buy-in. And so, yes, the awareness piece is critical, which we talked about last quarter, all around the whole piece on behavior change. If any of you were on the call last quarter, we talked about that. There's 5 stages to an individual actually partaking in a wellness strategy and wellness program. And so not everyone's ready at the same time. So the awareness piece is an important one, but on its own, it's very limited with respect to how much we're contributing. It looks great on paper, but it's just the engagement factor. If we have to dig 7 pages deep on an intranet page to find information, it's not going to seem as value driven as doing something more visible with repetitive messaging, communications, and really hitting those events in different ways instead of just sort of a signage up to hopefully people participate. When we start to see the same people participating in all of the different events, it's a cue that we got to kind of think about something different. So this just showcases sort of how the uptick in engagement, involvement, and accountability can really tend to lead to more engagement, more enthusiasm, more opportunities, and more motivation for improved health. And we know that I have this on my wall. It's better to stay well than to get well. I mean, how true is that? We wouldn't be in business if this wasn't the case. It's not about fixing people. It's really about promoting a healthier workplace. And this is where people are the majority of their time. So if there's different things we can do as leaders to transform a culture, to really focus in on the preventative, proactive piece to this discussion, then we can definitely start to steer a culture in the right direction. And that's what we have found, is that if we can shift things in a way to lean into wellness, not just a one-off kind of class or one-off event that we hope people come to, but how can the actual organization adopt this culture of health and happiness? And that's really, I think, where we need to spend our time in our discussions. So bringing me back 3 quarters ago, when we just started to define what it was. I mean, if I remember having a conversation with an HR manager, and she had a team of 8 people. And we had this discussion. And she said, Megan, I don't really know what it really means. Like, what does a workplace wellness or health promotion in the workplace mean? I have an EAP program. Is that enough? And, when in talking about this, there's different thoughts when it comes to what it is. I mean, I remember presenting in Halifax 2 decades ago when we first started what we do. And I was just starting my PhD in the field. And I asked the question, what do you do for workplace wellness? And we had hands go up. We run a lunch and learn. We have a newsletter, we do stretching, and it was kind of advanced 20 years ago. People were thinking about that. And then some gentleman stood up and he was so proud. He's like, we sponsor our softball team. So as you can see, there's such a wide gamut of what people really think it is. And so this is in working with the Ivey Business School and the development of a full literature review and understanding what it actually is. This is what it is. Workplace wellness programs are workplace-based programs that incorporate health promotion and disease prevention activities with the goal of improving the health of its people. Now, we know that, people are at work to work, and obviously organizations have to thrive. But if we can get back to thinking about the important pieces around tie into culture, the why, how we as transformational leaders can start to move the dial to have a culture adopt some of these activities and some of these plans, then I do find that discussion can be quite fruitful when it comes to engagement and people who want to participate because they feel like they're part of the bigger picture. So when we start to talk about some of the different pieces, there was a great article that we shared a couple of quarters ago on the element of the value of having a wellness team and a wellness champion network. And there's different models when it comes to the discussions around this. And so we talked about this as a value is determined by addressing the employee and population's particular health, productivity, and work-life needs. So it's identifying what's needed from a grand perspective and what the employees need and their ability to benefit the organization, work groups, and the individual. So we start to look at really all elements. It's not just hoping to goodness people participating in your yoga class, and if they don't, it's not successful. What do we know from that activity? And so if we can start to dissect and start to understand how we can evaluate these different things, then we'll have better idea as to how to improve. I mean, we all know that continuous feedback loop or improvement loop, really, when it comes to everything else in our workday, this is the exact same thing. So in several of the materials and what we have shared over the year, there is some valuable worksheets there for a wellness team to take a look at it and have a group work session to kind of evaluate really what's going on with your plan. So we don't need to get into too much kind of theory behind why we evaluate, but obviously there's a lot when there is a program in place that the powers that be need to know what's going on. So there is an element of maintaining accountability for those who are organizing a game plan. It's a great way to measure effectiveness. We'll talk about that in a little while. It provides that argument around the outcome-based reasons why to keep it going. It's always seems to be the first thing to go when things get rough and when things get tough. And now some organizations say, no, it's the thing that actually stays. And so those organizations get it. It's a different element, different thought process, different culture in some cases. But it allows an organization to really identify what those goals and objectives are and how they link, which we'll talk about, into the organizational core values, the organizational goals and objectives as the years continue. So why is it important? Well, we do need to look at what we're measuring. We have to look at some baseline measures, and I call these benchmarking measurables, which are just some key values and metrics when it comes to what to look for in some of the benefits usage reports, and we'll get into some of that later. We also like to look at two different things in evaluation. One is the how is the program designed and implemented? So how was it done? Was it communicated properly? Were there, groups missing? What are some of those implementation questions we want to be very aware of? And sort of as we start this discussion of evaluation, and then from an outcome perspective and effectiveness perspective, where do we go with it? We like to look at short-term, mid-term, long-term goal setting. More of the long-term is in conjunction and in alignment with the organizational goals and objectives. From a initiative or a activity perspective, that's where we start to get more specifically around some short-term goal setting. And that's where teams can really be powerful in their discussions around how do we make this even better the next time. If we ran a challenge this particular fall and we didn't have too many people participate, let's dissect it and find out why. Then do we look at a different way of encouraging others to engage in this as we move forward? Now, there are four, we call them meaningful factors, which simply means four identifiers when it comes to an organization and the effectiveness as we get into it of understanding and identifying what those goals and objectives are for that organization. It's very difficult to push something through feeling like you're going through a brick wall when there's no other value put on kind of what your objectives are, because it's something to be said, oh, it's just a nice thing to do. We just do this because, it looks nice on paper, and, we don't really care how it works. It's a check mark. Other organizations really look at a structured strategy based on some of the different identifying factors. So we talked about we'll talk about a couple of different things going forward here. We identified four. One is if we were to put 45 leaders in a room and we would say, what's the most important pieces of your business? They may say, well, it's our meaningful enterprise. We have to, there's a bottom line, there's production. We need to be in good financial stability as an organization, the importance of that particular organization thriving. Some others may say, well, we're a production force. We have shift workers. We are on a manufacturing kind of sector. Our piece on productivity is probably the most important. How engaged are our people in hitting our metrics day in, day out, shift in, shift out? And so that might be an important element of engagement. We might see other organizations say, well, from an employment perspective, we want people to work with us. We want people to be part of our team. We want to keep that talent. And so that might be another element of importance. And then other ones might be, as I like to say, this meaningful environment. It's like you walk into the organization and you know what it feels like as soon as you walk in. And I like to use the analogy from 30,000 feet up looking down. What do we see? Are people happy? Are people working together? Is there team camaraderie? Or is there churn? Is there, not very, effective collaboration? What is happening from a environment standpoint? And so I don't want us necessarily to think of the actual physical environment, like are there bike racks? Are there showers? That sort of thing. But really the climate. What does it feel like? What's the weather? saying when you walk into that organization. Now, I'm going to dissect all four and give us a little bit of insight into from a well-being perspective, but also kind of how they tie to some of the business factors. So putting 45 leaders in a room, talking about what are some important business factors when it comes to keeping your enterprise going. There might be some cost containment or profitability discussions to be had. Management quality would be another one. Quality of services, innovativeness, creation, that might be important. Looking at, anything organizations do as a long-term investment, where they need to be in a sound financial position. They might need to, tie in the community responsibility and social enterprise factor, and of course, the bottom line. So organizations who value their business and some of these business factors sometimes have to look a little bit outside the box when it comes to, so we implement a wellness strategy. Here are some of the pieces on how a wellness strategy, if followed best practices and success factors, which we've talked about a few quarters ago, when we start to then identify where we might see some of the cost containment, some of the elements of, profitability is through some of these important features. So one is some of the health costs. I'm going to get into what exactly to look into once I get to that section of the message today. Sick time, absenteeism rates is another great one to take a look at, and disability rates. Also, we don't want to forget about the paramedicals and the EAP usage. So all of these data points are helpful in evaluating how an organization is doing. And you can kind of see the tie. That's a really big piece in module 2, where we talked about garnering leadership support. We have to figure out, how do we speak the same language from a leadership perspective? And so if we can tie in some of those data and metrics associated with some of the benefits usage, some of the costs that are identified in our, semi-annual or annual reports from a usage perspective, it can give us some valuable insight into support some of these business factors that are important to those leaders. So we do recognize the value of a health promotion piece as a strategic play. And so this is critically important as we start talking about tying them together. The second one is the meaningful employment. So in terms of business factors that might be important in, if this is an objective for an organization, is, we have to have fair compensation, obviously fair benefits. We have to have respect, trust, autonomy. And there is career advancement, and there's plenty of employee training. So people who work with us, they feel like they're, definitely part of a team and they're cared for. How does the well-being piece tie into it? We can see in some of the evaluative measures like engagement surveys, satisfaction surveys, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes as well, is how do we start to tie in some of the morale metrics? And there's some definite interest in tying a health promotion or workplace wellness strategy to some of the business factors if this piece is important. And so we do find some nice connection here between the two. The third one is meaningful engagement. This might be, again, a piece to some of the production teams that we might see, where this is an important piece because they have to kind of, again, generate productivity, so many units per hour, per shift, et cetera. And so this is an important piece from a business perspective, and a strategic leadership perspective is to tie it back to the why. And so if people know that they are an important cog in that wheel, they are going to feel like they're more valued. Even though their job might feel a bit mundane, they feel like they understand the why. And so connecting it to the mission, vision, business goals of the organization, again, is a great transformational leadership discussion. When we have efficient teams or focus on their goals, there might be incentives. There's recognized and balanced work as well. That does tend to lead in that direction. A wellness strategy, health promotion program can absolutely support those through the engagement factor as well as productivity. So we do tend to see when a wellness or a strategy is implemented, there is that connection, and it can very well support some of those leadership objectives. Lastly, 30,000 feet looking down, what does the culture feel like? You walk into that office, you walk into that building, what does it feel like? And are people happy? Are they smiling? Is there a culture of health? Are people kind of getting out and taking advantage of the nice weather at lunchtime, or are they working through the lunch? What are they doing? What's the culture like? And so when we dove into this in module 2 and 3, in sense of kind of turning the dial and shifting the dial a little bit as to what we can do as influencers in health promotion. From a well-being perspective, this is where we get into the retention of good people and the attraction or recruitment of talent. And this is also another element of great metric. And if this is an objective of an organization, is the employee turnover, recognizing what that metric might look like. And then again, if we can get an idea of what we want to measure based on what our objectives are as an organization. And some people say, well, Megan, listen, all four are important to us. Like, it's not just one. It's definitely, all four. Then you've got a lot of evaluation to consider and some measurements to take a look at. If you're wanting to be an employer of choice, if you want to, have a various cost containment with respect to some of your numbers and some of your health costs, then your focus might be more on those other business factors versus some of these. So it does come down to an individualized, I think, discussion as we start to navigate what is the most important things to evaluate. I'm going to be shifting my screen in a moment and showing you some of the metrics from a benefits report and usage perspective. What are some of those numbers that are key in making decisions on a health promotion strategy? So we'll get into that. It's probably my most favorite part of the whole thing, actually, is to get down to the data and some metrics. Okay, so in measuring or evaluating how a program is going, remember, two things we look at. We look at the process, so like the design and implementation, and then the outcome and effectiveness. Those are really the two elements of evaluation. And I find that depending on how your program is set up, depending on how your wellness team is set up, particularly if you have 1 or 2 people making decisions versus 10 people making decisions, versus if you have a leadership, almost like a steering committee set up and you have a wellness team to be the implementers, that might be a different dynamic. Some groups, if they're all over the place, they have different floors, different cities, different satellite offices. They might build what's called a wellness ambassador network. So you have a small steering committee, and then you have various people kind of being the implementers, communicators, and messengers to kind of get their teams participating and communicating with what's going on. So there's different elements of how a program is designed and how a program is implemented, but we're going to now shift gears and talking about some outcome measurements. And so we're going to talk about the infamous ROI. It's called return on investment. We're going to talk about value on investment and value on caring. So interestingly, if we only focus in, as you can see on the graphic on the right side, really when we start talking about ROI, the only measurables that we really look into are some of your healthcare costs. So we need to get really good at looking at specific numbers, claims, premiums, usage percentages on our benefits metrics. If we only look at that data, we're missing a huge piece. So I encourage us to start to think of that. More and more employers and leaders now are recognizing the value and importance of looking at whatever level of program you want to run or have or are currently organizing yourselves. Is there needs to be, enough metrics built into it to warrant, keeping that wheel kind of spinning when it comes to innovative and creation in what we want to do next from a wellness perspective. We really have to understand what this looks like. So in terms of looking at the ROI, this is interestingly, 22 years ago, this was all the rage. ROI, 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 and the, standard has always been a 3-to-1 over a period of a few years. We'll be able to see, some changes. Three things we can really look to is healthcare costs, sick days, absenteeism rates, and disability claims is sort of might not be as obvious to people, but it's another metric. So if we look really good at looking at what these look like, then we're able to sort of track kind of where we're starting and what our numbers and rates are on an annual basis. That's how we start to identify what some of the returns are from a health promotion perspective. But it's not the only part of the story. So I'm going to use an example. An organization, 300 people, very public organization, had a sick day rate of 17 days per employee per year. Very, very high. And their focus 20 years ago, so let's say 18 years ago now, was to thread wellness and health promotion into not only the strategic plan, but they wanted to weave it through the entire culture. Every level of employee, every level of department, every level of supervisor, manager, frontline staff, C-suite executive, they really wanted it to be part of the DNA of that organization. It took 6 years of studying, looking at the trends, the data, and after 6 years, their sick days dropped dramatically down to the typical 6 or 7 days per employee per year. So not only was there an absolute massive return, way more than a 3-to-1, probably was a 20-to-1, because of how this was set up, it really hit on several different factors, not just the return on sick days. It went a lot deeper than that. So when we start to look at ROI, we have to understand what numbers we're looking at. But we also have to understand that there's more to a story than just a drop in number or an increase in number. We like to start looking at a percentage change, or what we call comparative data. What's the percentage change from year to year? Not just from 17 days to 7. Oh, wow, that's 10 days per employee per year difference. Yes, it's massive. But what is that from a percentage change? Because remember, the percentage change is the kind of the number we want to look at. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways to look at this in identifying and looking at what some of the numbers will look like on a benefits usage and reporting system. Is one of the key features of this, and I think this is a huge takeaway for today. Checking my time, is the drug classification data. So yes, all of the big numbers and claims and all of that stuff is going to be important. But if we get down to the granular piece of really what the picture looks like, I think from a health promotion standpoint, we have to understand what are the drug classification data according to prescription medications. Again, organizations are great. They give us some really great information. And I like looking at the top 5 if we can start to get a handle on what those top 5 might be. So this particular example was a few years ago, 18, 19, 2020, and 2021. And you can see how each year cardiovascular drugs and central nervous system agents is the mental health support that people need. It was cardiovascular and mental health across the board. And this is valuable insight in that now as we know some of the trend data, what if we were starting, say, a program in 2022, and we looked back the last 4 years, we could identify that from an organizational perspective, the importance for our initiative or planning, our strategic planning, lining it up with the lining it up with the strategic goals and objectives. If we get down to it, cardiovascular health and mental health are the top 2 things we need to be focusing in on. So from a design and implementation standpoint, it ties back to that. Now our discussions can be around this. We don't have to broadcast it to the entire universe that it's cardiovascular health and mental health as number 1 and 2 in our entire company when it comes to prescription medications, but the conversations can be had around the focus. And so this is where we start to identify what are some of those pieces that we might want to tie in to our program. Let me show you how percentage change works. Let's take an example where you have a premium of 1678 in 2020, and then in 2021 you saw it decrease. It dropped down to 1545. Your percentage change is essentially your 2020 number, your 2021 number minus your 2020 number over the 2021 number. So you can see there the example. If you can start to look at kind of your most recent date, and then if you were sort of look backwards, and there are some fancy testing you can do with t-tests and statistics. I'm not getting into that. This is really rudimentary when it comes to looking at what the percent change is telling us. So we know that there's been an 8.5% reduction in this particular claim or premium. The alternate is true. If we see an increase from one year to the next year, the same can be held true, is that we sort of look at some of those little bit of math when it comes to what the percentage change is telling us. Why is this important? Well, if we were to look at 2021 and we just hypothetically said 2021, we saw an 8.5% increase. 2022, we saw a 5.5% increase. We can then identify that there has been a change. Now, this is an important piece, and I'm going to use a real life example. Organization had a double-digit increase in their benefits and premiums and different things that, it's expensive. And they valued the slope change because they were trending at about 11.5, 12% increase. Well, the second year they still increased, but they increased 9%. So that 2.5% difference was a massive return for them. They're still increasing, but the slope, the rate of change is different. So there are certain things we as health promoters can support in terms of looking at the numbers and identifying what's important from a drug classification data perspective, and then getting back to kind of how to measure it. But there's another element of things are going to be big pharma, things are going to be increasing, and we've seen that. But what's the slope change? And if a culture and an organization values that change, that's another really great return. So it might not be increasing at the same slope. And that's where we start to understand what some of those changes might be. And so that's another example of return. When we talk about the second element here is value on investment. This is where we get into more of the metrics associated with participation, satisfaction, health risks, safety in some cases, productivity, some of those other pieces of metric or important numbers. So some people lump it all into ROI, but I don't think we can do that. I think we have to keep ROI to the actual numbers of usage from a benefits perspective, claim perspective, drug classification perspective, all of the numbers. When we start to talk about now kind of the process or design or implementation evaluation, this is where we have to keep in mind some of those other numbers. And so we do tend to find groups do tend to not always measure as much as they should be. Specifically if leaders are breathing down their necks about, tell me the effectiveness of this program. You definitely need to have some valuable, some evaluative metrics, but VOI measures how a wellness program affects the business attributes. So an ROI is a simple math. VOI measures how it affects the business. And so we can do the same thing from comparative data. I love the percentage changes because that gives us more of a story. And so I find that to be really helpful. A third element, though, of value of measuring outcome is the third element of VOC. And this is a relatively new-ish way of thinking about it. It's value on caring. Now, I've been sort of moving into more in addition to health promotion and business strategy in developing leaders. And the leadership development piece, I think, is a critical piece to this discussion of, how do we shift the culture into adopting and nurturing a culture of caring? This is how we do it. We can look at how teams work. We can look at relationships, connection, collaboration. We can look at the employee churn. We can look at how people are interacting at work. There's so many different pieces to this. I find when we can start to identify how well-being influence can support some of these things. I mean, there's so much value in that. And so when we can identify what some of those pieces might be, it allows us as health promoters and evaluators to identify what are some of the other things that are impacted and influenced with a health promotion strategy. You can get fancy morale, culture kind of questionnaires. These ones can be, again, tricky if there is a sense or a loss of trust and confidence on a team. I mean, we know if there's a structure change, a C-suite change, a senior leadership change, drastic changes to organizations, some of this stuff can be a little bit maybe less easy to find. But it is again, just to be aware of how can we tie this into the bigger picture. VOC measures how wellness program affects people. So VOI, the value on investment, affects a business attribute, so it supports ROI nicely. VOC looks at how it affects the people. And so this is another element I find of really great metrics and data when it comes to VOC. So again, just a few things to think about when we are identifying what are some of the different features of measurement and evaluation. It comes down to this. What is the objectives of the organization? And then where do you want to start measuring? And this will become helpful for groups, I find, when they can identify what are the most important things, what's most important to the organization. So from a meaningful enterprise, in looking at all those business factors we talked about, cost management tends to be the biggest piece, is maintaining and managing cost, profitability, bottom line. And in workplaces these days that are struggling with, costs and tariffs and et cetera, it's a tough one. From a cost management perspective, that might be the most important piece. From an engagement perspective, productivity management might be an important piece. From an employment perspective, maybe becoming employer of choice is an important one. The organization that I just shared saw that big shift in sick days over 6 years. They were adamant at, because of the culture shift, wanting to be recognized for some of the efforts associated with kind of how they were able to shift the culture. So they were able to see some really interesting recognition in what they were able to do through various awards and things. Not always important to people, but in some cases, some leaders care about that. The fourth one, from an environment perspective, what it feels like, that's where recruitment and retention definitely fall in. So if we are looking at where do we start measuring, if cost management is critical, then focus in on ROI. Get a handle on what metrics are most important. I'm going to share my screen in 1 second to show you the most important things to look at on the reports that we get to see every quarter, or sorry, every year. But the ROI piece is an important one for cost management, no question. Productivity management, this is where, yes, the ROI can kind of fall into that in some cases, but more predominantly it's the VOI. How does your wellness strategy affect the business attributes? So that's where we get into, again, tying the why, the mission, vision, goals of the organization to the shifts, the teams, the organization. So everybody knows that their role and how they play to that bigger picture. That's a value of that investment from a health and wellness perspective. We can tie that together. The other two on the right side of the screen both tend to fall into the most important metrics is VOI and VOC. So when we are getting into, and some people say it's just kind of the softer stuff, what people feel, and people feel when they walk in, and retention, attraction, being recognized in the work we do. It's softer. Granted, that very well could be, then we need to really focus on measuring some of those pieces because that's where we can sort of tie it back to the overall objectives of the organization. So if we know where to start measuring, then we'll hopefully able to have a solid picture of really what we're trying to accomplish. So when we line this up to our kind of initial graphic where we looked at kind of the value of various programs, we can also superimpose VOI and ROI to the same graphic. We know that from a value perspective and a return perspective, the more on the right side of engagement on the kind of the slope and focusing on health improvement and your program initiatives that we talked about last quarter, what you're doing, focusing on more engagement focused strategies, they tend to yield higher results versus focusing on only awareness. That's where we have to start to think if a leader is breathing down our necks to say, what's my return on an awareness only program? We need to be very clear about what metrics we're looking at. Are we looking at clicks on a website? Are we looking at where it is in the website? Are we looking at, how many people saw the message? Like some of those metrics are going to be important. From a return perspective, the further we can move to actually people engaging, participating, taking something from an initiative and implementing it long-term for improvement perspective, that's where we start to see the shifts in some of those metrics associated with ROI. We tend to see a much, much higher return when our program is focused on engagement. It's not just an awareness-based program. Awareness is part of it, but it's not the whole story. So when we start to look at this, we do tend to see a focus and a shift more toward a comprehensive strategy. So we use that as a best practice. If anybody was in our session, the first one or two, where we talked about that, it's connecting those dots. So it's a comprehensive plan. It's not just kind of hit and miss with all sorts of different things happening at the same time. There's a connection to it and people understand what that is. There's clear communication. Participation and engagement are different. Participation is signing up for something. Engagement is signing up, going, and actually taking something from the session. I use the example of somebody who attends a doctor's appointment, learns through some testing that they are pre-diabetic. And the individual has been told by the doctor that, look, if you don't start taking care of yourself, you're going to have to go on medication. So we hear this all the time where, there's a scare, there's a nudge. We call it a nudge or a trigger, something that has kind of prompted some change. They may start now to recognize what's available at work for them. So they don't have to go on medication. They might see something from an awareness perspective. They might be navigating the internet and see that there's a speaker coming. They might be excited now, reinvigorated to, understand maybe what's going to be important for them at the speaker event or at the health fair or at the yoga class or what have you. Not everyone's going to jump in feet first, and we know that. So we do need to recognize that this is a process. People say, well, how long is it going to take? Well, it depends. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on how supportive the leadership team is in this plan. And are they participatory? Are they also great role models? Are they transformational leaders themselves? How is leadership involved? Or are they discouraging? Oh, work through your lunch. You don't need to go for a walk. We need this done ASAP, which we tend to see. So again, it's very difficult to put a time frame. I do find that, the 3-year mark tends to be valuable to kind of get our heads around. It's typically what we say, but you can start to see massive changes after 1 year. You can start to see even more changes after 2, and even more after 5, 6, 7, 18. So it kind of depends. The more you measure, the more you're able to start to see what those results and effectiveness look like. And if you don't measure it, you're not going to know. So just a few things to keep in mind. So as we tie up, we are I hope you understand, an education-focused organization that we like to empower you. We like to empower leaders. We've done this, we're sharing best practices, and we communicate in different ways. We have our Wellness Works newsletter every month. That's probably where you heard about this particular session. We're going to be running them again next year in a few different capacities. We also have our YouTube channel. We have a blog that we also showcase every month with the video, a vlog, I guess we're called, and also a written blog. So we're also online. You can definitely find us. We are going to be sharing some valuable information today, in addition to all of the articles and the metrics analysis information, et cetera, that I'll share with you. But we also are sharing our summary of services just because it's our last session of this year, as well as our mentorship program, which is a 4-part evaluation program. So we can kind of work together to identify benchmarking, planning, designing, implementing, and what evaluative measures are going to be important for your program. So that's all what we do. So wanted to share that with you. Today, we are taking a look at a couple of things. I want to highlight this value of prevention. This article is awesome. It's a little older, but it talks about this workforce that identified cardiovascular health in the drug classification discussion. They started implementing targeted cardiovascular health programming because of that metric, and they saw some massive changes. So it's a really interesting article. It's a little older, a little long, but it'll give you, I think, a bit of intel and insight into that. We're including the essentials to workplace wellness. It's a checklist to identify what are the most important pieces for you and your organization. I'm also sharing a metrics data collection form with you, and of course, this access to the mentorship program.